Welcome to the Go Slow to Go Fast lifestyle podcast, where we trade burnout for balance, hustle for harmony, and learn to live with intention, one slow breath at a time. I'm your host, Kendra Chapman, and today's episode is one that will expand how you think about identity, transformation, and the spiritual architecture of who we are. My guest, Reginald Martin, is a spiritual architect, metaphysician, and creator of Kametic Physics, the science of ontology for identity transformation and spiritual sovereignty. His work explores how unseen operating systems, religion, culture, family, and even leadership are all scripts that quietly shape our sense of worth. And in this conversation, we'll explore what it is to be as a human in this experience on Earth, and the Kametic Ancient Wisdom, as well as paradoxical Heka, his master protocol that integrates inner conflict through breath, voice, energy, and symbolism, and how reconnecting to these ancient foundations can accelerate deep transformation in moments, not years. Reginald, I just want to say thank you for being here and agreeing to sit down with me today for this discussion. But before we get into everything, can you just talk a little bit about how you're going slow to go fast these days?
I'm really excited to be here, so to share with your audience. But to go slow to go fast to me means really tapping into mindfulness and tapping into that inner aspect of who I am, and that for me is how we're connected to the universe. And when we're talking about manifesting and stuff like that, a lot of times we think it is our actions that it is our will and actions that really manifest into the world, when it's really our being. So when we are being and, authentically living as ourselves, that inner vibrational aspect is reflected as our life. Life is feedback. So for me, in order to go slow to go fast, I tap into mindfulness and tap into my essence and my vibrational being to manifest the things that I want in my life.
I love that you've teased out what it means for you to be still. Do you mind just leaning into that a little bit more for our listeners and viewers when you say that you use the mindfulness practices and with your being? What would that look like for you in the morning
Yeah,
or in the evening?
yeah. So for me, Kendra, and this comes from the foundational perspective of really a lot of things what I teach is really from an ancient Kemetic, an African perspective of we are souls having a human experience. That is the essence of who we are. Okay. So in this context, you're not trying to elevate yourself or a certain level. The soul becomes your baseline. That vibrational essence of you becomes your baseline. So when you can tap into that, then you can know when you're off base, so to speak. Okay. And for me, the idea that me as a vibrational being, as a soul having a human experience, the baseline for that essence is joy. And any time that you are off track and you're not feeling joyful or moving through your joy, then you are off base. So for me to tap into that joyous state is being mindful and is tapping into that essence of who I am. And that helps me to recalibrate or to stay calibrated through my day. I'll even set an intention for when I wake up in the morning that I'm going to frame my day as today is my temple. And all of my actions are an offering to stay balanced and in alignment with the universal aspect of who I am, the source of my essence.
I like how you grounded that thought in that you set every day's intention in that space. And then if you aren't feeling joyful, then you know that you've got some, I guess, recalibrating to do.
Yes, yes, because a lot of times the way that we have been taught is, and this is where I talk about too, there's a difference between, so I talk about ontology, okay? And ontology is the idea of being, okay? So a lot of times the way I was I was raised in a religious setting to where we had an ontology of brokenness. Okay. In other words, we were born sinful, born wicked. Something was wrong with us right out the gate. So from the before, the bottom line is that Christianity came from this ancient Kemetic source through the Greeks, through the Gnostics. But their teachings were that we are whole, we are divine from the beginning. Okay. And the way that we access life is through recognizing that divinity and us really developing ourselves to where we become that whole self and operating from that perspective throughout the day and throughout your life. So ontologically speaking, being in alignment with your divine self becomes the baseline that you operate everything from. If you're not living joyfully, then you can immediately know that you're off base. That becomes the basis of recalibration for you in everything and anything that you do.
And I want to just for a moment pause and see if we can provide some context for listeners and viewers. The
Mm-hmm.
Kemetic background, that belief system is ancient. And if you don't mind just kind of walking folks through that a little bit, that it does predate Christianity too.
Yeah, absolutely, and it predates it by thousands of years. So, and really, the ancient Kemet is really prehistoric Egypt. So that is one of the ways that we can know the area that we're talking about. So this is, in the ancient Mediterranean area, and this is a civilization that existed. Ancient Egypt existed 10,000 before at least Christianity. I mean, you really want to think about, to put it in the context how ancient it is. Cleopatra, her death is closer to our time than it is to the beginning of the ancient Kemetic times. Okay, so that's a way that you can kind of think about how old this civilization is. But they were essentially the teachers of ancient spiritual systems all over the world. Okay, so from the beginning, there were certain principles that have been taught, even in the Mediterranean, through the Greeks, through everybody in that area, that they talked to each other. They passed around ideas, and ancient Egypt was really considered the Holy Land back then, or what we would call the Holy Land. Okay, so these ancient spiritual systems, they had a philosophical foundation. Okay, but then when Christianity came on the scene, they changed these philosophical foundations to something different. Okay, they really distorted a lot of the ancient spiritual ideas. You can go back and trace them through symbolism and mythology, but it's hard to trace it when you from a religious perspective. When you see everything from a literal perspective, then you lose the contact with the symbolic essence of what those teachings were. And you think that Christianity tells us that what they taught was something new and revelatory, when in reality, what was new was not true, and what is true was not new.
I'm thinking many gods, mono versus poly.
The mono idea came from ancient Kemet, so the monotheistic idea. But what we had was when the first Egyptologists started to discover these ideas, they only could think of it in the context of what they knew as Christian, because most of the early Egyptologists were Christian. So when they saw Egypt's system, they assumed that all the different aspects of what they call them gods, but in actuality they were netters. And when we say a netter, it is essentially a personification of a universal construct, of what we might call universal laws today. They personified those laws. Well, the Egyptologists thought that they were worshiping many gods, but what they were worshiping, or what they and it wasn't worship at all. It was actually what they were doing. They had a very sophisticated system to where they actually talked about and created a mythology around how the one became the multiplicity. So we're talking about a monotheistic idea in this, but in the context of how does that one source manifest itself into the world and the universe?
Okay, that helps. Thank you. And I was doing some research for some of this, also went over to like the Celtic areas
Hmm.
of Ireland and Scotland, but it's definitely, it seems to have influenced that part of the world as well. So it's,
Influenced really, many of the ancient systems. Okay. And I don't want to say that every ancient system came from here, but the influence of the ideas they spread. Okay. And but when you really get down to the truth and principles, universal principles, then there are many ways that can express the same principle depending on the culture and depending on their natural habitat. Because ancient Egypt, they had more of a desert and they were around the Nile River and that area. So they expressed and looked at nature in a different way and things that were natural in a different way than somebody that might be in Ireland. But the ancient principles, the foundational principles, they're talking about the same thing, just a different way. So when you see mythology being talked about in different ways or different types of mythology, then it is the same ideas, but they personify them based on the ideas and this culture that they know.
okay. Yes, because I mean, I have so many questions, but I want to focus in on a little bit. I wanted to make sure that we had an understanding that this is an ancient belief system, an ancient wisdom, and kind of get an idea of timeline and what part of the world we're talking that it does stem from. But then from there, can you just kind of talk a little bit about how you came across this to begin with?
Yeah, so for me, it all started with, again, I grew up Christian. Okay, so that was my foundational connection to anything that was spiritual or religious. And I look at spirituality and religion as two different things because as Christians we were taught that religion and spirituality are synonymous. But religion is about really following rules and the idea that the power of your being is stationed outside of you. You have to placate that being and you have to worship that being to make that being feel comfortable enough to say, okay, I like you. I'm going to give you what I want or what you want, you know. But from a ancient spiritual perspective, and you can look at this in any spiritual system around the world, instead of you trying to worship something outside yourself, it was about you developing your own inner divinity and connecting to that because you become a source. Or an expression of the source. Well, today we might have those same ideas. We might say that the universe is we are a holographic expression of the universe. In other words, we are the source just in human form. So many of the ways we'll talk about these same ideas, but we'll just mention them in different ways today. But it's the same general principle is that there is only one source and we are an extension of that source.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but how I came, you asked me how did I come across that, was it just came to me through living life, and I went through some difficulties, went through a divorce and different things, and so it was me trying to grapple with really reconciling all the things that I was going through. Okay. So, and a lot of times, Kendra, is what really, how I learn a lot of my lessons is through my life experience. And a lot of times it has come through my relationships, whether they're romantic, familial, or whatever it might be. At this time, this was around 2000, around the year 2000 was when I got divorced. And believe me, I was going through it from 2000 to for a number of years, about 4 or 5 years. I remember reading a book that says it usually takes a person 5 years to really get the divorce, to really detach yourself from everything emotionally and logically from it. And when I first read that, Kendra, I was like, man, that 5 years, man, I'll be over this in about 5 months. No, Kendra, it took more than 5 years, okay, for me to really extract myself. But around 2006, I heard The Secret, the movie The Secret. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with The Secret, but The Secret said something that really, for the first time, it helped to verbalize something that I knew intuitively, but I didn't have a vocabulary for. And that was the idea that thoughts become things. In other words, your inner thoughts are really a projection of your life, or your inner thoughts become the projection that you know as life. So in that sense, life becomes feedback for you. Okay. Well, what made that real for me, Kendra, was just my dating life after my divorce. I kept noticing that I kept dating really the same type of woman, but they just had a different face, different body. Okay. But essentially, consciously, they were the same type. Okay. Same thing that were happening with one was happening with another. And so at that point, Kendra, I had to ask myself a question. I said, the question is either these women have all gotten together and conspired to treat me the same way, or I am the common denominator here. What is happening? Okay. So in other words, instead of me, because at first I was operating from this bitter perspective of, man, what's wrong with women? But then I had to turn that back and say, wait a minute, there's something happening with me that I keep doing this. And when I heard that thing about the secret thoughts become things, that was like, aha. Okay. And that started me on a journey to really trying to find out, because I had grown up religion where I was told to just believe and have faith. I didn't want to accept what the secret had said on faith. I wanted to find out, where did this stuff come from? So I spent the next probably 5 years researching and doing a lot of different things until when I stumbled upon the Kametic teachings. That's when I not only found out and discovered where the secret came from, those ideas, but also Christianity. And what I found is that what we might call the New Age ideas today were in actuality the foundation of all the religions, especially the Abrahamic religions. It is the foundation, but with Christianity, they distorted a lot of it. And then because of Christianity, Islam came into play. Okay. But the first distortions were really a lot of that was what Christianity did. So that's how I came to basically answer my questions about two systems that I had questions about.
That's fascinating. I always think of the three major religions because they are very rule driven, Judaism and Christianity and
Mm-hmm.
Islam. But it's interesting to hear, about ancient practices that predate those religions and that they, in my mind, and it's just fascinating that you came across it after kind of the secret opened the door.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It opened the door. And how I knew that, Kendra, was in the movie Rhonda Byrne. She never said it, but I just remember these images of the Greeks, that she was showing this. And she just basically said at that time that these ancient civilizations had and they knew the secret. Okay. And when she said that, she flashed up the Greeks and the amphitheaters or just the different, what the Greek civilization looked like. But what that did was it threw up my antenna because I knew from things that I had read probably 20 years ago, I knew that the Greeks learned from the ancient Egyptians. So that helped me to basically go and start to researching what the ancient Egyptians believed. So the idea that thoughts become things is really based on the ancient Kemetic idea of Ma'at. Okay. And Ma'at is the principle today we would call Ma'at consciousness. Okay. But the idea that Ma'at was called, or some epitaphs that was used for Ma'at was truth, balance, and reciprocity. So when you talk about each one of those have a much, much deeper root in the ancient spiritual science. And the one that really, I guess, shot up my antenna more was the idea of reciprocity. And then this came back to the idea of thoughts become things. And I don't know if you've heard the idea of as above, so below, as within, so without. Okay. That is a foundational principle of Ma'at. So when we say thoughts become things, life is actually showing you who you are being from a vibrational perspective. And it is up to you to decode life in a symbolic perspective to tell you the energy that is being reflected back to you. And you end up making self corrections rather than trying to correct everything and everybody out there.
So I'm wondering how that understanding, you're a seeker, sounds like you've done a lot of research. You've learned about this ancient way of living and thinking and being. So when you first came across this practice, did you start to change or adjust anything that you were doing in your daily habits, or did you feel like it was just always a knowing and you've been doing this all along?
There's a little bit of both, you know. And a lot of times what happens is that again, the way that I've learned, I learned through religion. And I don't know if you grew up religious or not, but the way I grew up, religion was something that you practiced on Sunday, but then the rest of the week you kind of went and did the same thing. I mean, you live the same way, but as long as you gave God his 2 hours, and I don't know how many times I used to hear that, you just give God his 2 hours on Sunday and then, blah, blah, blah. But miraculously, through just belief and through acceptance of the belief through faith, miraculously, it was supposed to fix your life. Okay. Well, anybody knows that's just not true. You know, you don't learn life or you don't experience life and then have things start to work for you just through proxy. That just doesn't happen. You know, you go through things, and going through things is how I started to discover there are certain principles that all human beings experience. There are certain things that happen and certain principles that work no matter what walk of life you come from, no matter who you are, no matter what the culture. And that's what these ancient principles were teaching, was they ended up being mental technology, a technology that helped you to really, again, go back to what I was saying before, help you recalibrate and get back on track when you off track. But you have to really reframe a lot of these ideas from I'm broken to accepting the idea that I'm divine. And then that gives you a whole new frame in which to operate from.
Yeah, like you, I grew up in a very religiously rule-driven household. I was Irish Catholic, brought up, and I
Hmm.
went to mostly Catholic school most of my school years. But like you, I started to question, when I would see misalignment in message versus action, right?
Hmm.
And then just constantly that cycle of, well, I get the golden rule, do unto others as you would have done to you. I think that is basic ancient wisdom. But
Yes.
all
And
the other
every
things,
system has that golden rule, every one of them.
mm-hmm,
And there's a
yep.
common thread.
Mm-hmm. So I think like you and like me and many others out there listening, however you were raised and whatever your belief system is, when something is true and when something needs to be questioned further. So when you started doing more of that questioning, what you believed and then what you were doing and how you were going to work that into your practice, did you find that things were happening like more so for you as far as the manifesting, or did anything major change, I guess, after you?
Yeah, what ended up changing, Kendra, was me and the way I moved through life. Okay, because I still have my ups and downs, because but it's a way that I've chosen to live my life that I never want to ever look back on my life and say, what if I would have, you know. I never want to look back on my life with regret. So that means I take chances and risks. Okay. I don't always like what's happening with me emotionally when I'm going through it, but it's just something that I've chosen to do. So the way that I look at it is, Kendra, is how is it that we can live life and get centered in our storms? Okay. How do we do that? What do we use to do that? And if somebody and what I used to be told was just lay it at the feet of Jesus. Okay. That didn't work. Okay. So another thing I was told was just pray about it. Okay. Well, what I was finding is Kendra, I was given these ideas that were not working because I would pray about stuff, nothing would happen. Okay. The things that I wanted to happen. Matter of fact, the opposite things would happen. Okay. But there was people that I knew in my life that they weren't Christian and they weren't living righteously or the right way, but yet they were getting their prayers answered. Kendra, that's something wasn't right about that. I was like, well, what's happening here? So what that immediately said to me was there had to be something more than what I was being taught. That if this person is not living like I was being taught, or like they should have been, but yet they're still getting their prayers answered, that was a disconnect to me that begged questions. So when I really started to get deeper into these ideas, it was, how can I get my prayers answered? How can I manifest the life that I want? And then at that point, I started looking into being a scientist of my spiritual journey rather than somebody who just believes superstitiously and hope that if things would work out, or that I could please this God out here, this angry, jealous God, and then maybe, he might bestow on me his blessings, you know. So that was a different, so I had to shift. How do I find my peace? And that's how I started to looking at it. So even today, when you are aligned with these ideas, when you are aligned with your baseline soul self, peace and joy is the states that you will experience the most. So that again, it just comes down to live in a way that is principled, that brings you peace and joy into your life, or allows you to experience more and more of that.
So, I mean, obviously you've been on a journey and you have found what brings you joy. And I think, I don't know how many of us out there are able to feel that on a daily basis, but I think it's something that we all are searching for. And even if we
When you say
find it,
not
it
not
doesn't.
feel that on a daily basis, what do you mean? The joy?
Right. Or at least searching for the joy or seeking the joy or hoping to
Okay.
feel the joy every day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
No, I know a lot do struggle with that.
hmm and I think, it is something that people, I think, are waking up to. They are realizing it is possible. They may not know how to get there. Do you have any suggestions for somebody who's just starting to realize that they could have more joy in their life? They could have more peace.
Yeah, and Kendra, I think a lot of it really, again, it comes down to, you have to be able to examine your belief. And from a psychological perspective, it's that we have to get into this metacognitive state, at some point. And you have to examine what you believe and why you believe it, because that is really the filter that you're going to really experience life through. And if your belief is that you're broken, you're sinful, and you're unworthy, then when things are not going right, what is going to be one of the first things that you're going to start to think about is, what did I do wrong? Why am I being cursed? That's a whole totally different frame. So just that, and a lot of people have never thought about that frame and how it impacts them on a daily basis. Forget about where it came from, the religion or anything like that. Just think about that. How many of us would tell our children to stand up in a mirror and say, I am unworthy and I am nothing without God? That was something that I was taught on Sunday, but that's not something that we would teach our children to do, because we already know psychologically what that would do to them. But yet on Sunday it's accepted. So if you're living from that perspective, then yes, joy is going to be a difficult state. And if you think about it, you were raised Catholic, I was raised Protestant, but there was an undercurrent of, if you're enjoying life too much, you might be sinning. You might want to look at yourself and see what's happening. Again, that's another belief, Kendra, that keeps us from really accepting and feeling good about life and about our life. We're supposed to be guilty. If things are going too good, we might need to hold back and feel a little bit of guilt about that, because that person over there is not living life. They don't have your life, and you're feeling good about it. And look at them. What's happening with them? You should probably feel guilty about that. And that's how we end up moving through life, where we're just bouncing off of this frame of, I'm broken and unworthy.
Yes, which in my world, it all stemmed back to the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, and they had to be the center, and you had to go through them to get to God.
From Christianity started from the Catholic Church. So there's some of that is within. If you call yourself Christian, then you are on that belief system, period.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And so you, like you said, with the Kametic philosophy, you're working on yourself to have that spiritual relationship with God, source, universe. And you don't
Yeah. And
need
it's
an
not even a
outside.
relationship, Kendra. It's you are God in human form. Okay. It's not a relationship. And that's again, it's moving from the idea that you're separate from the source. We are the source. And that's where actually, and understand that these beliefs came down from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, through the Greek Gnostics, because the Catholic Church was first. Many of the ancient fathers were actually Gnostics before they started the Catholic Church. They started the Catholic Church because of really, they started to infighting with the Gnostics. So from a political perspective, really is really where ancient Christianity was born. From a political perspective is where the Bible was born, because most systems didn't have rule books like that. Okay. So they started all of that. So that's where it started to change. It started to get distorted. So all of that we know. But this is the thing that I want people to understand too, is that once you can go back and reclaim those ancient archetypes, then you already have a frame that you know and that you're familiar with. So a lot of the stuff that I teach is not going to be something that is like, oh, this is so weird. No, it's what you've lived. But I help you to reconnect to the ancient framework and the ancient archetypes that you already know. But I shift it from a literal belief to one that is symbolic and archetypal. And once you can do that, it gives you a whole nother way to look at this. And you don't have to look at from the perspective of, I got to believe a certain way in order to have salvation.
Right. Or be guilty if I am having too much
Yes.
joy in my life. Right.
Yes. You don't, your baseline. You should be feeling your joy, you know? And I can take that from a practical perspective, Kendra, is one of the ways that I have used that to actually in my life is that there was a time that I was dealing with stuff and I was going through depression, deep depression. Okay. But what I did was is I knew this mental technology. I understood what I needed to do. There was nobody that was going to come save me. There was no pill that was going to right what was happening in me. I needed to do that. So one day I just said, you know what? I need to feel good. I want to feel good. So what I did was I ended up doing something that brought me joy. And one of those things is just researching these ideas. I love researching. I love learning these ideas. So what I said was, okay, I'm just going to start looking up, researching some stuff. And I had been depressed for a few days because of the things that I was going through. But then I started researching just being who I am, my authentic self, my I am. And then, 15 minutes passed. I was feeling good. I was enjoying myself. I wasn't watching the time. An hour passed, hadn't even watched the time. I was just doing something I enjoy. Then a couple of hours passed. I was just doing something I enjoy. But it was because in that moment, what I look at that is I let joy be my guide out of the darkness. Okay. I let the light of joy within me guide me and pull me from the darkness. And one thing led to another, and I wasn't depressed anymore. I started doing some other things and started creating some more content, some videos from my place of joy. So that to me is the practical application of this idea that you let joy be your baseline.
Mm-hmm. Which, it's something that I hear many are looking for, is to be able to enjoy the work they do every day so it doesn't feel like work. And I think that is joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a thing too, Kendra. It's like we are in a society where we live through our obligations. We live through our sacrifices. Well, obligations and sacrifices are the opposite of joy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in a job that you hate, and trust me, I've been there. I'm in a job that I hate, but I have familial obligations and things like that. But what ends up happening is that we stay in that funk, in that mire, of depression and anger and all of that, those emotions, to, how do I say, to meet our obligations. Society says that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to meet your obligations. But if joy is your baseline, then what that is saying is there's something else that you're supposed to be doing. So a lot of people say, I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know your purpose is to be joyful and authentic. And when you're living joyfully and authentically, you impact the consciousness of the planet. It's not about what you're doing, it's who you're being. And when you're able to live life through that joyous state of being, you impact the planet and the consciousness, and somebody can actually end up connecting to that consciousness, download it, and then start living their life in an authentic and joyous way. Okay? It's not about what you do, it's about who you are as an aspect of the creator who is being. There is a Bible scripture in the Old Testament where Moses says to on the mount, he's speaking to God and saying, "Who shall I say sent me?" And the scripture says, "You tell them, I am sent me." Okay. Now think about that. I am sent me, not a name or not anything like that. I am, because anything that follows I am is. Anything that follows when you say I am, it is who you are. It is your being. And if you say I am broken, guess what? The universe is going to reflect that. It's about reciprocity. You're broken, the universe is going to confirm that, send you all of the people and circumstances to confirm what you are. That's a totally different way to think about this and a totally different way to operate. And this is what I'll say to this as well. I'm really talking about some things that really is a major shift in thinking. And what we've done through Christianity is a lot of times it becomes really this intellectual pursuit, okay? Where the mind takes primary, where your essence is something that is really in an energetic state where you're really going beneath what the mind has been structured on. Okay. So it becomes the it's like the energy is and the mind becomes the scaffolding for the energy that you've built something on. So when you're operating from this idea of essence and joy, okay, it's not about belief at that point. It becomes who you're being. So I say, you can listen to me and you can hear this, and you're going like, well, should I believe that or should I not? I'll say, practice it for 30 days and see what your life is like. So you don't have to believe me. Be authentic, live life through your joy, and see what life will be like. And I'll bet you that you're going to see life in a whole new way and experience it in a whole new way. That's the power of these ideas, not just theoretical. They work. From looking at yourself, really again, as your baseline is your joy. That is the baseline. You're connecting to the essence of who you are. And from everything there, then you have what I would call the permanence. And the ancients had actually a term that they called it the philosopher's stone. Okay. And the Philosopher's Stone was really about the idea of living from that permanence of who you are. It is something that is immovable. And you, as a soul, that permanent joy, that state that you live in, is immovable. And when you live from that immovable aspect of you, then everything else you can start to figure out, how do you align your life? How do you align what you're doing? If you're doing something and you're not getting joy from that, then that's a signal, not a curse, you know? Not that you're broken, it's a signal that you're out of alignment. And then you can start to look for, when is it that I really felt my joy based on things that I do in my life? That starts to be like breadcrumbs that you can start to kind of look for to see which direction that you might want to take your life in. The thing that you're going to have to deal with, though, is society going to say, what's wrong with this person? They're not doing what they're supposed to do. Okay. They're not living like they're supposed to live. What's wrong with you? And then you start to go like, okay, wait a minute. People think I'm crazy. Okay. Then that becomes the part of, are you trying to please everybody else, or you're trying to live life from the joyous state that you want to and create life on your terms?
Right. There was also something that I wanted to check in with you before I let you go about the paradoxical Heka's role in
Hmm.
resolving inner conflict. Can you
Hmm.
talk a little
Hmm.
bit about that?
Yeah. So this is a process that I've really discovered. through studying the ancient concepts. And it is really a mental technology that bypasses belief. It bypasses, all of this stuff, and is really, really simple. So Heka, from a Kemetic perspective, actually it is like the what we might call the sound that creates form. It is what everything is. It is really, they said that Heka was before the gods. Okay. And I'm just using the terminology that people understand, that it was before the gods. The gods used Heka, okay, to create. So paradoxical Heka is the idea that you're going to use sound as a foundational principle to really reorganize your energetic field. Because the way that they looked at us is that we are an amalgamation of nine energetic aspects. One of them we've heard of is called the aura. Okay. But that aura is something that is part of your energetic aspect. Okay. But you can literally program your field and reprogram your field, or reprogram the distortion out of it through the paradoxical Heka. Paradox means it is this and that. Okay, so that's just a simple way to acknowledge it and define it. Okay, but most people think that it's a contradiction when it's not. If you think about it, the universe is a paradox. There is light and dark. Okay, when you're walking, even your body operates in a paradox. Think about it. When you walk, Kendra, does your right leg and right arm go out at the same time, and then your left arm and left leg go out at the same time? Or does your right arm go out and your left leg go out, and then vice versa? Okay. If you think about it, that's a paradox. But in order to walk and move, you have to do both those things at the same time. Okay, in order to walk and move. So it's precedence for universal, that this is actually a universal idea. Okay, but how you do this is you're going to speak two truths that exist. And then what happens is your energetic system is going to organize around the higher truth, which is your permanent self. This is how I would do that. Say I'm I might be stressed out about the job, and I want to be successful. All of us. We want to be successful on a job, if nothing else, just to keep it so we can pay our bills. Okay. But you might say something like, even though at the moment I'm feeling stressed, so I'm speaking. So breath is conscious. When I'm speaking, you are literally programming your field. Okay. So I'm speaking it. So even though I might be feeling stress about my job and what I'm dealing with, I honor that stress. I honor the fear that I'm feeling, and recognize that I deeply and completely love and accept who I am. So I just connected that state that I'm feeling to the permanence of who I am, loving and accepting me. That's paradoxical Heka. What I just did is, what will happen is that when you know that it's worked, is you'll actually feel goosebumps. You might feel goosebumps. You might, if depending on what it is, you might break out crying. Okay, depending on what you're working with. Okay, but in that moment when that happens, the paradoxical Heka work, and you just started recalibrating your field. The more you do that, you end up raising your baseline. Okay. Because you got to think the brain has already been, you've been doing certain things and living your life a certain way. The neurons in your brain are all connected in a certain way in a network. Well, when you start to speaking paradoxical Heka, it literally reforms the network, because you're actually reshaping the energetic scaffolding that all that network is built on. Simple process, but very powerful.
And so that's just a way to kind of resolve that inner conflict that you might be going through.
Yes, because what happens is that instead of, a lot of times what we do in our society today is we try to bypass, meaning, well, everything is love and light when you're getting your butt whooped by life.
Right.
you know,
Right.
or we'll try, what's another term that I've heard, that we psychologically we'll try to pattern interrupts. Okay. But each one of those it ends up feeding the issue energetically, because you're trying to push against something. Whereas paradox says, wait a minute, both of these are true in the moment. State that. And then what happens is your energetic system is going to organize around a higher aspect of you, and it's going to reconcile it for you. You don't have to believe it, just practice it. Okay. So it goes beyond belief and taps into the energetic field underneath all of that, the scaffolding that's built those beliefs, the distortion that you built on top of the energetic beliefs. And then it actually reconciles everything for you. The more you practice it, the higher you raise your baseline to where you're living from your place of joy.
Because that is the goal.
That's the goal, is that you want to live from your place of joy. And now you have a process that you can do that. And I promise you it works. Try it for 10 days. And this is what's going to happen, especially like if you're somebody that gets caught up in negativity and negative beliefs. Try for 10 days about your negative beliefs. Whatever you have in your negativity about, even though I might be feeling negative about stuff, I honor that negativity. But I also recognize that I deeply and completely love and accept who I am. At that point, I'm not judging it. I'm not bypassing it. I'm accepting it. That's a part of integrating. It's just like the universe. The universe is light and dark is integrated in the universe, but we try to fight it. Even if you think about music, you have a wave, you have the trough, and then you have the peak. You cannot have one without the other. So music is a paradox to make sound.
Right.
Same thing with you. Light and dark is who you are. It's a part of who you are. And in this way, Kendra, the shadow becomes fuel for your transformation rather than you having to try to fight it.
I mean, this just kind of goes back to those Catholic beliefs of having to have a priest absolve you of your sins. You have to go to confession. And really, we have the power to do that for ourselves.
We
because
do.
we are the light.
We do. We are the light expressed, you know. We are the light and the dark expressed, you know. And that's where religion, again, it teaches you that, you know, the power to change your life, to change anything about you is somewhere outside of you. Okay? That creates a dependence on the system in many different ways. But it not only creates a dependence on the system, it ends up creating blocks for our own self.
Yeah.
You know, it ends up creating the idea that something is wrong with you. When you start from that perspective, and this is another thing, I'll give you one more thing. A lot of times people will ask, what is wrong with me? Okay. If you ask that question, you are going to get an answer. The universe is going to show you what's wrong with you. But from an ancient Kemetic perspective, you ask, what is this teaching me? That's a totally different frame. And when you ask, what is this teaching me? You look at it from a different way because everything becomes a symbol of the energy that's underneath all of it.
Right. I think it's a growth mindset instead of coming from lack and that we are broken in some way, like you've shared. It's really
absolutely
growth and where we need to go next.
Yes, put it in today's terminology, it is absolutely positively a growth mindset.
This is definitely getting me thinking more and more about ancient wisdom and what we've all just known inside of us to be true. We just have to trust it.
Bingo. You hit it. You hit it. You have to trust it. And that's one of the hardest things that we have to do is to go through is to trust it because we were really taught not to trust our own understanding.
Do you have any final thoughts?
My final thought would be basically to live life on your terms. Everything that you need is from within you. You can find it. Live life on your terms, unapologetically and authentically, and life will be magical.
I love that. Thank you. What a powerful and illuminating conversation with Reginald Martin today. His perspective invites us to slow down, look within, and reclaim our inner architecture with awareness and intention. If you're a coach, therapist, or simply someone on a journey of self-discovery, I hope this episode helped you see how going slow through breath, presence, and inner integration can truly help you go fast towards lasting change. You can learn more about Reginald's work, Metaphysics, through the links in the show notes. And until next time, remember, Slowing down isn't falling behind. It's how we move forward with purpose. And as always, the light in me honors the light in you. And as you head into the rest of your week, let your light shine through. Take it slow, take care of yourself, and just know sometimes slowing down is the fastest way to lasting change. Thanks for listening.